Hi, guys. Welcome to another Monday night study. We have been going through some sneak peeks of Jude and Peter and a few of those other things. And then we took off last week because we went to a conference in Oklahoma City, Prophecy Watchers Conference. That worked really great. I was able to get to see a lot of you there. A lot of you came up and said that you watch us every Monday night and just had questions and wanted to meet me. And so that was fantastic. We had a great time. Everything, I think, went really well. So several people have been asking questions about not just the Sabbath and everything, but ancient history type questions. So what I thought I would do while I'm working on during the week, the translations of the Hebrew New Testament, and we're doing good on that. We're actually making some really good progress. We found something really interesting today, but anyway, that's another story. So I thought what I would do is go through for the following weeks or next month or so and go through Genesis. I think it was last year we did a basic pre-flood history, but it was mainly with Enoch. Actually, it wasn't pre-flood history. It was Enoch in general, but that area. So what we want to do with this series is go basically with Genesis, chapter by chapter, or half chapter, whatever the subject is, and then combine it with the text or the history from Jasher, from Jubilees, from the church fathers, anything in the Dead Sea Scrolls, anything extra along those lines. So we'll go ahead and get started with that today. And we'll start looking at Genesis chapter 1. And this is interesting, and there's a lot of things in here that we get questions about. And so we'll go ahead and start. This is just Blue Letter Bible on the internet. So this is the King James Version. And it says, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved," and that could be hovered over, "the face of the waters." Now, there is a Targum of Genesis that actually there's several of them, but most of them say exactly the same thing. But there's one particular Targum that says instead of the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, two or three of them say hovered over the face of the waters. But instead of Spirit of God, there's one specific one that says the Messiah or the Spirit of Messiah. So it's interesting to see all these little evidences of ancient, really ancient Hebrews understanding the Messiah as God incarnate. So these little evidences are like all over. But in this case, God, whomever we want to talk about, the Holy Spirit, God the Father, the Messiah, and being involved in creation. So the Spirit of God did that. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Let me see. Let me back up here. One thing with verse 2, there is a teaching about the earth being without form and void. And it centers on, and there's a lot of other things that go along with this, but it centers on the word was. And in Hebrew, the word can mean was, or it could mean became. It's just a past tense to be verb. And so a lot of people understand that and translate this, the earth rather, became without form and void. And that is a valid grammatical translation. But so is was. And basically the idea is if you translate this was, we're talking about in the beginning, God created matter in general. And from that formed this deep waters, and there's no earth yet. And out of the water, he formed earth, and then he formed plants. And as we're going to go through here and talk about, if you translate this as became, then that carries the connotation that God created everything. Something happened that completely obliterated the planet, and God is now recreating it. And there's a lot of other verses like this in Jeremiah and other places that talk about this. And a lot of my friends believe that this should be was. There is no pre-Adamic world. A lot of my other Christian friends think there actually is or was a pre-Adamic world. And so the way that I look at this, and I've looked at it several times, but again, if it can be translated was, and it can be translated became, then there's really no evidence to prove one way or the other. And what I've told people when they ask me about the Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 gap theory is I'm waiting to find a Dead Sea Scroll or something to give us a little more information. So through the Holy Spirit, if he's wanting to communicate that there was something like this in the fall of the angels or something pre uh, pre Adam, some sort of creation, then what we're going to look for is the Holy Spirit and the writing of a prophet giving us more information. Like, what did they look like? Where was their capital? Should there be any ruins on the planet? Maybe some of these big monoliths are pre-flood, but maybe they're pre-Adamic. So something to go on. What did they look like? Who was their first president? What form of government did they have? Just something to give us enough information to know that, oh, absolutely, there was something. Otherwise, the logical way of looking at this is to say it's just was, and this is how it got started. So again, we can't really prove one way or the other, but just wanted to let you know that there is a group of good scholars on both sides of that debate. Anyway, so it was without form and void, and that phrase is used in several places in the text. So, like for instance, in Jeremiah, the land became void and without form, meaning everyone was scattered and destroyed. Most of the trees, most of the wildlife, almost all of the people, you couldn't see anyone there. So it was empty or void without form. So in this case, though, we all agree that we start with Adam at creation and go forward. And that's when our calendar starts. So we're going to start with that and go forward. So the Spirit of God, or Spirit of Messiah, moved on the face of the waters. And God said, whether that be the Holy Spirit, God the Father, or the Messiah, either one, or any of those, or all of them, God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And this was the evening and the morning of the first day. Now, if you look this up in Josephus, Josephus actually makes the comment that since it says the evening and the morning of the first day, that it's talking about a normal day, a 24-hour day. So some people are going to look at this and look at the 7 days of creation and say they must be eons of time, like millennia or something. So several thousand or thousands, tens of thousands of years, we had plants. Finally, we had God create or evolve or something, mammals, or maybe lizards. And then thousands of years later, something else happens. So they try to divide that up. Josephus makes the comment that since it's used in that language, it means exactly what it says, and that's a physical day, 24-hour day. So notice what we're seeing here. We have the day and the night, and this gets confusing a lot of people with the calendar. And chapter 1 is all about the calendar and the Sabbath and the basic 7-day cycle, or 7 cycles of 7. So in this case, what's interesting about this is he calls the darkness night, the light day, and this was the evening and the morning of the first day. Now, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it talks about when a day starts. And there's a section in the Damascus Covenant, which we've published, but it's talking about how to do rituals and how to determine different things. And in the process of doing that, it says that the Sabbath begins at sundown on the 6th day. So that would be Friday. And the 7th day is the Sabbath, which is Saturday, and then Sunday is the first day of the week. So anyway, the point being, no matter how you look at that, the point being is when the sun is setting, that's when the day starts. Now, we do something really odd. If you think about it, it's pretty odd. On the Gregorian calendar, we start our days at midnight, right in the middle of pitch blackness. And we also have the old idea, or in our language, of the morning has dawned. You know, the dawn comes and then the day starts. So we have this concept, there's a day and there's a night, and there's also a 24-hour day cycle. And so you would think we would all use different words for that. So, because it's really confusing for somebody trying to study the calendar to have a 12-hour day and a 12-hour night inside of a 24-hour day. Why is there a 12-hour day and a 24-hour day? It's just weird if you think about it like that. But we have the same concept in Hebrew and Greek, and everyone has the same concept. As we're going to see from the scrolls, this is talking about the basic calendar that started with Adam, went through Noah, and went on. And then Gentile nations will begin to change. They forget things. Then they begin to change things, and they'll try different calendar systems and things like that. But everybody has this 7-day pattern. And so it's interesting. They talk about the setting of the sun. If this is the sun and it's coming out the horizon, it'll come down not when it touches or when it's completely under the horizon, but when it's exactly at the middle. So if you see a line and then half of the sun on top, when you see half of the sun, that's exactly the moment the Sabbath starts. So then Saturday, the same thing at sunset, when you see just half of the sun on the horizon, now it's the first day of the week and you can go forward. So it talks about that. So this is a very fundamental thing. So God's calendar starts at the evening, at dusk, basically. And they just let God's calendar control it. So you and I would know in the wintertime, dusk, the setting of the sun might be around 5 o'clock in the afternoon in some places. And in other places in the summer, the same place rather, in the summertime, it might be 9 o'clock at night. So that's like a 4-hour difference in some places, or at least a 3-hour and some minute difference. But it always cycles. So the whole idea is we as Americans try to make it down to the second and how to figure out which side and everything. The ancients just said it is what it is. So the summer days are longer than the winter days. But by the time we get back to the equinox, it's all the same. So it doesn't really matter. So rather than trying to calculate anything, just look at the sky, at God's calendar, and follow directions. So this is the evening and the morning of the first day, and light was created. God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let the waters divide from the waters." So the word for firmament here is atmosphere. It's what it means. So there's actually a layer of water. There's a canopy, or was a canopy, that covered the planet. And there's a lot of evidences for this. And this is actually when the canopy collapsed. That was part of the flood of Noah, amongst other things too. And the theory is among creation scientists that part of that formed an ice ring around the planet. So the idea is pre-flood, when you had a complete canopy, it filtered out almost all the cosmic radiation, and people lived to be around 1,000 years. Once that collapsed, we had an ice ring with whatever kind of forces are there, magnetic or whatever, but it seemed to diminish some of the cosmic radiation. And so what we see in Genesis, and we'll see as we go forward, that mankind's lifespan after the flood was cut in half. He lived to be around 400 instead of around 900. And then for 4 generations, that seemed consistent. And then in the 5th generation, something happened, according to Genesis, because man's lifespan got cut in half yet again. It was 220s or so is about the best you could do. And then it slowly goes down from there. Abraham lived to be 175. The children of Jacob was 165. The children lived to be around 130 something. And then it kind of evened out. If you don't take care of your body, you'd live to be about 60. That's the way it was in Jesus' time. The Essenes, with their lifestyle, their herbal medicine, still live to be about 120. And there's several places around the planet today, because of their lifestyle, their health, their food, what they do, still live to be around 120. It's rare, but there are actually groups of people that is common. So very interesting. We need to study the scrolls. because you don't want to spend the last 10 or 20 years of your life in bed in pain. You want to live as long as you can healthy. Like the scripture talks about Moses, his step wasn't haltered and his eyes were not dimmed, and he died peacefully at 120. That's the kind of lifestyle we want. Anyway, so this firmament happens. There's this canopy created. It says, God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament. So right now there's no land, it's just all water, ocean, from the waters that are above the firmament. And it was so. So from the canopy on top of the atmosphere and all the waters on the planet under the atmosphere. God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. So again, we see this evening and morning part. God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let dry land appear. And it was so. So he changed the earth, allowed the base in certain places to come up to create dry land. And then so we've got what a lot of the scientists are calling Pangea, one spot, one giant continent surrounded by water. God called the dry land earth, and that's Eretz in Hebrew, but the same basic meaning. And the gathering together of the waters he called seas. So there was probably a north, south, east, and west sea, depending on how the land was shaped. And we can see evidence of that in Hebrew manuscripts. God said, let the earth bring forth grass, and the herb yielding seed, and the fruit of the fruit tree yielding seed, the fruit after its own kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth, and it was so. So everything is being designed by God to replicate itself, not mutate and form something else or evolve into something else, but to create its own kind. So when he did this, the earth brought forth grass, and the herb yielding seed after its kind, the tree yielding fruit, and those whose seed was in itself after its kind. And God saw that it was good. This was the evening and the morning of the third day. So God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, for seasons, and for days, and for years. So this is actually telling us, well, years, obviously. And the way the calendar works, God's original calendar, and we know this from the Dead Sea Scrolls, is that the new year is in the spring. It's focused on the spring equinox. And so at that point, whenever that starts, and we'll see it in a minute, that is the first of Nisan, the first day of the year. And we'll see some other things that go along with that. So you can use this then to calculate the years. Every time we're past the first of Nisan or past the spring equinox, we're in another year. Now, exactly how you count that is debatable, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. Remember how we said in the wintertime, days are much shorter, and so in the summertime, they're longer. So in the wintertime, the Sabbath might start around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. In the summertime, the peak of summer, it might start around 9 o'clock. It's just sundown. So it varies slightly. So likewise, we're going to have a leap system of some sort that starts the year differently. We have that in the Gregorian calendar. Once every 4 years, we have a leap day, except in certain years. But that's the general pattern. So it's for years. You can calculate years. You can calculate days and then seasons. Seasons would be spring, summer, fall, and winter. And then for signs, and so this would be the word for general signs. So it's used a lot of different ways, but a lot of times signs and seasons are talking about things like Moedim, which is actually just a day. So you can calculate the regular days and the holy days, like the Sabbath and the festivals and things like that. You have to know how to do it properly, but this is just what's being created at this point. So let them be the lights that he created. Let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and it was so. God made two great lights. So there's probably stars now forming or being able to be seen the way the canopy or the expanse works at that point. But there's two great lights. One is to rule the day, and the other is to rule the night. And he made the stars also. Now, I'll make a comment about this. I've had some atheistic people say, well, obviously, this is wrong because the sun is its own light. It gives off light, so it's a light. The moon is not a light. The moon is a reflective thing. It does not produce its own light. It's not a light. So this is wrong. And again, it's all part of not knowing the language. The word for light in Hebrew is or. The word for that would be like a candle, something that gives off its own light, or the light in general. But something that reflects it is called a meor, which actually breaks down to from light. So a mirror is not an or, it's a meor. The moon, the sun, for instance, is an or. The moon is a meor. So in this place, and of course, how do you translate that into English? You just say light. You don't try to explain all that. So, but in this particular place, the word here for the lights is actually meors. There are multiple meors, meorim. So light holders. And that is something that is a light or a reflective surface that reflects light in some sort of constant way. So the moon, when it's full, always shows the same kind of picture, the same amount of light. It's always the same. It's a meor. So again, it's interesting how so many people try to come against the scriptures and change things and say it's wrong because science proves it's this. It's the same. God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. They'll say the same thing about this. The sun and the moon are not hanging, a mile up inside the atmosphere of the earth. But there's multiple firmaments, there's multiple heavens, and that's taught in other places. The first firmament or the first heaven is where the birds fly. The second is where the sun, moon, and stars are. And the third is where the first heaven is, or the God's throne. And then, according to the text, there's upwards of 7 heavens. Paul mentions being caught up to the third heaven and seeing things that he can't relate in language. That's in 1 Corinthians. So God set this firmament in the heaven. Which heaven? Obviously the second. To give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and to rule over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And this is the evening and morning of the 4th day. So we'll stop there at this point and look at these. So we've got 4 days of creation, and how the calendar develops. So the very first thing that you need to know is that a day is a 24-hour day when you're counting multiple days. It starts in the evening at sunset. That's where it's marked. And so every sunset is a new 24-hour day. And like in all languages, a day, a 24-hour day, is made up of a day and a night. And when you use it that way, day means a light time where you can see. A night means a dark time when you can't. If there's a full moon, you can kind of see stuff. But if there's a new moon, you can't see anything. Most of us in the city anyway, growing up, have probably never been in real darkness, where you're out in the middle of somewhere. There's no street lights. There's no lights of any kind. And it's a new moon, so there's no light from the moon. You can look up and see the stars, which are really beautiful, but then you try to find your way around. It's almost impossible. So you just don't go out at night because you're going to end up hurting yourself or getting lost. Like a snowstorm, you can't find your way back. And with a full moon, on the other hand, or any other kind of like that, there's enough light to see. So anyway, so these are the startings for that. So let me stop here at this point and we'll go over to Jasher and we'll see what it says. So this is the ancient book of Jasher we put together, and it's part of it's the text that's mentioned in the scriptures in 2 different places. We won't go into that, but this is just one of the history texts. There's several history texts. There's a Seder Olam, there's the book of Jasher, which is just ancient history. Very, very good to explain things. Jasher gives you about 3 to 4 times as much information in Genesis as Genesis. So it gives us a lot more. So starting at creation, here, let me do this here. There we go. So it says, God said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness. And God created man in his own image. Now, a lot of people will look at this and say, who was God talking to? Let us, you and me, make man in our image. And a lot of people try to say, well, he was talking to the angels. Nowhere does it say anything about angels being involved in creation. The whole idea of an angel trying to create or recreate things is Genesis chapter 6, the Nephilim stuff. We'll get to that when we get into chapter 6. But in this case, it's pretty obvious we're talking about a Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Messiah, or the Father, the Messiah, and the Holy Spirit. So we will create man in our own image. And God formed man from the dust of the ground, and blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul endowed with speech. Now, this is going to be almost word for word with chapter 2, and we'll get into some of the things about that. And then it goes on from here. And I think we'll probably stop here at this point too, because this one will, because this gets into Abel and Cain and stuff like that. But basically, this is the first start of creation here. Let me go over to Jubilees and we'll kind of look at this stuff. So here's Jubilees, and it's going through the same kind of stuff, the creation of the world. This is chapter 2 of Jubilees. And it says for the first day, kind of the same thing. The angel spoke to Moses concerning the word of the Lord, saying, write a complete history of the creation and how in 6 days the Lord, again, literal 6 days, the Lord had finished all of his works and all that he created, and he kept the Sabbath on the 7th day and hallowed it for all ages. Now, actually, I probably should have capitalized this because an age is not just some random amount of time. It's exactly 2,000 years, according to the Essenes. And there are 4 ages, 2,000 years apiece for the first, the second, and the third. The last age is simply 1,000 years. We call that a millennial reign. So the ages, the calendar, everything is spelled out on the calendar, exactly what, when, how, why. So, but he's hallowed this. He starts the 7 days of creation, and he hallows it for all ages. And he appointed it as a sign for all of his works. And again, everybody knows light and darkness, day and night. It's just a fundamental part of our calendar and our system. So, and then it goes on saying, on the first day he created the heavens which were above, and the earth and the waters and all the spirits which serve before him. So spirits would be angels and anything else that's out there. So according to this makes it sound like there is a 7-day creation. There probably is no gap theory. It doesn't say that, but it kind of sounds like it. So all the other spirits and things that are out there, angels or whatever, created on the first day. The angels of the presence, sanctification, spirits of the winds. It goes on and talks about all the different kinds of things. So right here it talks about winter, spring, autumn, and summer. So winter, spring, fall, and summer. And the spirits of his creatures, which are in the heavens and on the earth. And he created the abysses and the darkness, the eventide, night, created the night and the day, and the light, which dawn and the day. And he prepared in knowledge of his heart. And thereupon we saw his works, and we praised him and lauded before him on this account. The angel talking to Moses. The angels were rejoicing in creation because it was so cool. For 7 great works he did on the first day. And then it mentions on the second day he created the firmament in the midst of the waters. The waters were divided on that day. Half of them went up above, and half of them went down below the firmament. And it was in the midst of the water, the face of the whole earth. And this was the only work that God created on the second day. So he takes this water or mist or whatever it is, and separates it into two places, puts an atmosphere around the planet. So there's no land yet, but it's just basically a water ball. There's land under it, but from the surface, you would see this water ball. There's this atmosphere of oxygen, nitrogen, and other stuff. And then on the top, there's this thin canopy. I don't know if it's thin, but there's a canopy. And everybody kind of makes fun of us for believing in a canopy, even though Josephus and many other people talk about it. People forget, though, that these small planets in our solar system have a canopy. You can't see down to the surface of Venus because of the water canopy. Neptune, I think, and several other, or some of the, Neptune has its own stuff, but some of the other satellites around Neptune and some of the other places have water canopies, and you can just tell by looking at it. So, you know, a lot of those are hotter than the Earth, so they might argue that it wouldn't happen at that point. But then again, maybe the formation is what we're talking about. Anyway, according to this, there's a canopy. And the mist, and the mist covered the whole Earth, and this is only work that he did. Okay, so number 3, the third day. On the third day, he commanded the waters to pass off from the face of the earth into the whole earth into one place, and dry land to appear. Now, again, one place doesn't mean like waters are all right here and there's land all around it. It just simply means they pull back, or however it forms, so that there's a place for water and there's a place for land. And as you see, the water is called seas, plural, yomim. And so we're talking about, you know, like wherever the land is, there could be a North Sea, a South Sea, an East Sea, and a West Sea, or some other bays or whatever. So, okay, so the waters, he commanded them, and they retired from off the face of the earth to one place outside of his firmament, and dry land appeared. On that day, he created for them all the seas according to their separate gathering places, and all rivers, and the gatherings of the waters on the mountains, and all the earth, and all the lakes, and all the dew of the earth, and the seed which is sown, and all the sprouting things, the fruit-bearing trees, the trees of wood, and the Garden of Eden, in Eden. Now notice it says this, the Garden of Eden in Eden. So there was a map, if you will, a pre-flood world. And there's a certain place where Adam and Eve were created. We'll see that later. And that's not in Eden. He was created in one place and was moved over to Eden to do something, or placed in Eden. The Lord placed him in Eden. So there's all these different things. And there's actually some basic pre-flood maps. And we'll see where Enoch's city was and things like that is actually. It's never been excavated yet. Most people don't know where it's at, but it's interesting to look at this stuff, to look at the old records and know that there are certain things in certain places, and they're not even that hard to get to, but nobody knows they're there. Nobody's ever even went there to look to see what's in there. So it's interesting. We'll probably will one day. Let's see. And Eden and all the plants after their kind. These are the 4 great works that God created on the third day. And I want to get up to the 4th day and stop there on this text. We're doing the same thing. On the 4th day, he created the sun and the moon and the stars, and set them in the firmament of the heaven. Again, not the atmosphere, not the first heaven, but the second heaven, to give light upon all the earth, to rule over the day and the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. So we'd have these even cycles. So 12 hours of day, 12 hours of night, varying slightly, but who cares? A 24-hour day. God appointed the sun, we call it the sun, to be a great sign for the earth for the days, and for Sabbaths, and for months, and for feasts, and for years, and for Sabbaths of years, and for Jubilees, and for all the seasons of the years. And it divided the light from the darkness, and for prosperity, all the things that may prosper which shoot and grow out of the earth. These 3 kinds he made on the 4th day. Now I want to draw your attention to this. So God appointed the sun to be for, and Genesis we just read, it's to be for signs and seasons and days and years. And we know what a year is, we know what a day is. Seasons, probably the 4 seasons, okay? And then the signs, there are other signs. This is a little more specific. This gets into God's calendar. This is all spelled out in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So there are days. Okay, we know what a day is. We know what a Sabbath is. That's the seventh day. And at the end of the seventh day, the cycle starts over. There's another 7 days. We call them weeks. So there's 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. This is a real basic calendar system. So the weeks turn into months. And so basically, there are 12 months in the year according to that calendar. There is a holy day or a festival at the beginning of each month, at the beginning of each season. So there's Tekufa, there's Kodeshes, there's Shabbats, there are, and it goes on for here, then for feasts. So the word for feasts would be Moedim. We're talking about the 7 feasts that God created where prophetic things happen, special days, like Jesus was prophesied to come and die on Passover. When it finally happened, and 4,000 years later, he died on Passover, exactly as prophesied. So these feasts are prophetic. And how do you figure out what day they are? Well, you might know the year, but you're going to have to look at the sun, which is a sign for these things, to calculate the proper Passover. And if you could do that, Daniel told us what year, and then the Passover ritual tells us the exact day and hour of the Messiah's death. And then there's the rapture one, the second coming one, the birth of the church, Pentecost and all those things. So very important for prophecy. So we're getting the idea here that if you want to know prophecy, anything about dates, setting dates or anything, you have to use God's calendar. And it's almost taken for granted that you would know everything, so they don't really talk much about it. But you have to kind of piece it together because we go by a Gregorian calendar, and the Jews now use a lunar calendar, which was created in its present form in the 300s, I believe, by Hillel III, 3rd or 4th century, somewhere in there. So, and then for Sabbaths of years, 7 sets of years, we call those Shemitahs. And then 7 Shemitahs, then there's a Jubilee year, and that whole cycle is called a Jubilee cycle. So then it says, and 4 Jubilees, and for the seasons of the years. So seasons of years, if we're going through here, we're talking about a 7-day, then we're talking about a month, and then we're talking about a season, the 3-month period, and then we're talking about a whole year. And once you learn to figure out the years from equinox to equinox, then there's a set of 7 years, which is a Shemitah. 7 of those plus 1 year is a Jubilee. And then we would say 2 Jubilees is a century, but they would calculate 10 Jubilees as being an Ona, 4 Onas as being an age. And again, there's 3 full ages and then another half an age, 3.5 ages in human history is what they would be talking about. Okay, so we'll stop here. Let me go over at this point to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. And this is from the Dead Sea Scroll calendar book. And I want to mention this because people get upset about you can't ignore the Sabbath. That's true. You should not. And so then they'll say, well, in that case, we need to light the Shabbat candles. We need to say the prayers in Hebrew. We need to do this. We need to do that. No, we don't. There is a difference. And so what we're talking about here is, and even people that usually do light the Shabbat candles, you can do them if you want to. There's no prohibition against it now at this point. But if that's all you do, you're not observing the calendar properly. And it's one of those tricks that Satan gets us in to say, well, you've got to do something. Here's what you do. And you do the thing, but you don't know why you're doing the thing. And the thing is supposed to teach you why things are the way they are and how to watch. So look at this. This is, I'll just read this and then read the quote. This is page 34 of our DSS calendar book. This special purpose was to rest 1 day out of the week. So there's a Sabbath where you rest. and then calculate your next week. You need time to relax. You need time to think about the future. You need time to plan. That's what this is for. It was also the basis for the world calendar. Josephus wrote in his history that there is a time when all nations observed a 7-day cycle in their calendar, but never observed the Jewish rituals, because the Jewish rituals come along later. It's part of the law of Moses. So it's for 2,000 years, they didn't do Shabbat candles or anything like that. This tells us that the original God-given calendar consisted of a 7-day week. The Romans changed this to an 8-day cycle and experimented with some other things. But then it was eventually changed back to a 7-day cycle by Julius Caesar in 46 BC. So what we go by today is the Roman calendar, and it's not the same as God's calendar. It's slightly different. It's a solar calendar, so basically the same idea. So what we're going to see here is that they change it back, and according to the Essenes, they didn't mess up the Sabbath. So when we say Sabbath is Friday night and Saturday, they didn't mess that up, or I guess they probably did for a while, but when they put it back, it's the same. Can't prove that, can't disprove it, but it's what they say. But here's the quote from it, and I want to share this to you. This is Josephus against Appian, because he's doing one of these arguments about you're not really keeping the Sabbath if you don't do the rituals, or whatever, or we shouldn't have to or can't or whatever. But it's against Appian 240. And this is what Josephus says. There's not any city of the Grecians, nor any of the barbarians, or any nation whatever, or wherever. There's no nation anywhere, okay? Whether our custom of resting on the seventh day has not come. So there's no, in his time, he's saying there is no nation anywhere that doesn't have a 7-day week cycle. And we're going to see when we get to chapter 2, God says that we need to observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Holy means set apart. So in other words, observe the calendar. But now the question is, are we supposed to do rituals on that day? You can. That's a good way to make sure you're marking the calendar, but the main thing is to mark the calendar. Take the day off and rest, make plans for the future, check the prophecies, calculate the calendar, see what dates things are going to happen on, and go forward. But he says there's no place you can go in his day where they don't observe a 7-day cycle. None of the Greeks, none of the barbarians, Romans, no one, okay? So they all rest on the 7th day. But he says our fasts and our lighting of the lights or the lamps and many of our prohibitions of our food, Jewish customs in general, are not observed. So what he's saying here is that basically the entire world follows what is mentioned in Genesis about observing the Sabbath. We all observe it. We have a 7-day calendar which marks it, sets it apart as the end of a week, sanctifying it, making it holy, setting it apart. That's it. Now the Jews will come along later and have a lot of rituals. We don't have to follow those rituals. I would advise you, if you have time, to look at the rituals, especially the Moedim rituals, because they teach prophecy. The important part is not that you do it, but you understand what it is. So if you went to church, for instance, and you did the communion, and you had no clue what it means, you just eat a cookie or a cracker and drink some grape juice or whatever, and you say, abracadabra, whatever, and then you go home. That's just what you do. And you have no understanding of what it means. It doesn't help you at all. You have to understand that it's a ritual that points to the death, burial, and resurrection of our Lord, and what the symbols mean and where we got the symbols, just the basic ideas. Once you understand that and you sanctify it, keep it holy, whether you continue to do that every day, every week, 4 times a year, never. There's some denominations that do it every week. Most people do it quarterly. At my church, we do it once a month. Some places will do it Well, actually, there's a few denominations that refuse to do it because a long time ago, there's a big argument between Protestants and Catholics on how to do it, what it really means, etc. And they refuse to participate in it. Anyway, so it's that kind of a thing. But I thought that was interesting. Now, here's an idea of Creation Week. Now, we haven't got to it yet. We'll get to it later. But they talk about Creation Week is, I think I have a basic idea on this. Okay, no, I don't. We'll see it here in a minute. But Creation Week, the first day of the week is Sunday. So this first day is when the light was created. And then the firmament was created the second day, which we call Monday, on this cycle. On the third day was the plants and the animals and stuff like that. And on Wednesday, it says the sun, moon, and the stars. So once you have a sun and a moon and the stars, you can start a calendar. So because of Creation Week, the Essenes said we were going to start our day on the Wednesday. So New Year's for them is always on Wednesday. And it's the same week cycle as what we use. So they're going to do this. And so the way this works is it's a 364-day year, which means everything is divisible by 7 times 53 weeks. So you've got all that, the same number of weeks divided by 7, 364. So this is exactly 360 days of 30 days each in 12 months, plus the tekufas, which are outside the months. We'll talk all about that later as how the calendar works in general. And we've done it many times. I think we have a YouTube playlist on that. But so the way this works is the actual equinox may be, say, here on Friday, and then Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday, Sunday. And when it finally goes back to being in the previous week, they add a leap week. So then it starts over again. So the Wednesday closest to the spring equinox is always New Year's, and no matter how it works. So you're only up to 2, at the most 3 days off before it resets. Whereas the modern Jewish calendar can be off up to a month, and then it resets because it's lunar rather than solar. The Gregorian calendar is even more specific. Spring equinox, which would be the New Year's, is always March 20th. Well, there's actually probably 2 or maybe 3 years in a century where it might actually hit on the 19th. So just a few minutes before midnight. But ours is always on that. So ours is extremely accurate, but we mess up our weeks. So if I was to ask when New Year's occurs, you don't know. You'd have to go look it up. It's different every year. In this case, it's always Wednesday. So this is a really cool calendar. And once you learn it and you read stuff about what Moses is doing, what Jesus is doing, or what's going on, it'll say a certain date, 3 or 4 days later, this thing happened. You know what day of the week it was, how close it was to a Sabbath or a high holy day. You'll know what they were doing, what they were preparing. You'll just know everything about that situation just by knowing the calendar. Very, very fascinating. So anyway, let's go through here. There's an article on how the week was changed or not changed. And I wanted to share with you here. Got a lot of different historical quotes. Oh, let's see. Let me think. Next one's on page 39. Okay, so here's an example of the equinoxes. So the spring equinox is in March 20th, and that's when the sun would be shining directly on the equator. So it's as it rotates, it's exactly 12 hours of night and 12 hours of day. When we get to December, it's in the as furthest south that it goes. So it's the longest night and the shortest day. We get back to the September fall equinox, then it's exactly even again. And then we go to the summer solstice, and that's when the day would be longest. Maybe I said that backwards. Longest night in the winter, longest day in the summer. The equinoxes are the same. So we go through this pattern. And the spring is when we are supposed to start the calendar. And there's quotes in Genesis and other places about, or in Exodus rather, about that. So that's that. And then one other thing here on page 34 or 40, 7 I wanted to share with you. So, okay, so here's the Essene year, and we just already mentioned this, but here is a year. There's exactly 52 weeks. I think I said 53 a minute ago, but 52 weeks, and a week is 7 days. 52 times 7 is 364, or is 360 rather. And then you've got these 1 day in between each time. So these things, if you think about it, like the spring equinox, it's partially winter and partially spring. So the day after the equinox is actually the first full day of spring. So these equinoxes and solstices are simply in between days. They're not really spring or summer or anything. They're an in between day. And so this gives us a 364-day year where all the weeks come out evenly. So there's spring, summer, fall, and winter. There are 12 months consisting of 30 days each, 1 through 12. And then when you add the extra 4 days, you come up with exactly 52 weeks. So everything works out perfectly. So again, it's interesting. Now the solstice will drift slightly, and when it gets 3 to 4 days off, that's when we would add a leap week, and we keep that solstice week the beginning of creation, or beginning of our year rather. So just to show you those kind of things. So we'll go ahead and stop there. So we looked at the first 4 days of creation and mainly how the calendar develops, and we'll talk more about the Sabbath and other things, and we'll continue the stories. So when you get to Cain and Abel, there's some extra information that is not available in just in Genesis. You get the next chapter about Lamech killing somebody, and there's a 7 times 7 thing, and it doesn't give you a whole lot of detail because you're supposed to already know the story. And so we'll look at that story, and there's a lot of extra information in these texts that will fill in Genesis. And we're just going to look at the pre-flood world and a little bit post-flood to kind of see how everything comes together, and then plot things on the calendar and go forward from there. So we'll stop there for tonight, and I will go to the chat room and just see if there's any questions. Okay, let's see here. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Became a member level Archangel. Thank you very much. We have 3 levels on our membership. So the lowest level gets in the chat room to ask questions. Second one, which is the Archangel level. Angel level is the lowest, then Archangel. You will get access to the members only studies, which we don't have that many of them, but we're planning on doing more. And then the highest level is when we come out with certain things, you'll get the PDFs of them. So just a way to thank you and thank you for supporting the ministry. So thank you very much for coming on board with us. Really appreciate that. First question, does the Old Testament reference the lunar calendar? No, it doesn't. There's nothing in there about that. Now, there's a few places, depending on what translation you use, it talks about the new moon. And it actually is a word for month, both in the New Testament and the Old Testament. So the new month would be the first of a month. And if you have a lunar calendar, the first of the month is a new moon. So it just became a normal thing to be called that. But there's a different word for moon. If you really meant new moon, that's a different word than a Kodesh. So you're talking about how those things go together. So it doesn't actually reference a lunar calendar. So, and when we look at it, we'll look at it later, but in the book of Jubilees, let me back up here. So in the book of Jubilees, we're just going through this first part, but when we get to Jubilees chapter 6, see if I can see this here. It talks about Noah's sacrifice after the flood, and then the covenant that he made, the covenant with the rainbow. And that's interesting to talk about, and the Feast of Weeks. And then we get down here, it talks about the Noahide laws and the Noahide calendar and how they start and how to observe the Tekufa. And then it also gives a prophecy that in the last days, the calendar would be corrupted and they would switch from a solar calendar to a lunar calendar. Now that's, you can say, well, maybe this is true and maybe this is not, but this is what the text says. So it's interesting that that's the prophecy in Jubilees. All the Dead Sea Scrolls point to a solar calendar and talk about these same things. As a matter of fact, one of the demarcations is that if you are a Essene following the solar calendar, keeping the laws the way they used to be, you're called a son of light. Paul uses the same term in the New Testament. If you're a Pharisee following a lunar calendar, you're called a son of darkness. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad to follow a lunar calendar, but it just became a name. They follow a lunar calendar. They don't do the festivals the way they're supposed to. Technically, they should be cut off because Jews are supposed to do the festivals properly, and you can't do them properly if you're doing them on the wrong day. So it's just a blasphemous kind of thing from an Essene point of view. So anyway, it'd be interesting here. We'll get to that eventually. Do you think the Hebrew word for month, Kodesh, could have changed over time also to mean new moon? Yes, it did. Once they switched to a lunar calendar. The first of the month, which is a new month, the Kodesh, it's going to be the same thing as a new moon if that's where you marked your calendar. And so that became a normal thing. There became a Pharisee tradition of going out and having at least 3 rabbis look and cite the crescent moon to know that the month has begun. And that was a real thing, not something commanded in Scripture, because you're observing the wrong kind of calendar at that point. It was a thing that was done. Later on, Hillel III created the current calendar, and it's calculated, and they changed some things around to make it fit some of their ideas and just went forward with it. It's almost identical to the Silurian calendar of Antiochus Epiphanes. And he was the one prophesied in Daniel to change the times and the seasons. And so those things are, there's a little bit of evidence almost everywhere to this whole thing. So yeah, it came to mean new moon. And today, if you have a lunar calendar, new moon is new month. It's just the way it would work. If you're using a solar calendar, then it's different. Question: I'm persuaded when history, the Bible, speaks of dragons, it's referring to dinosaurs. I would agree. Why do you suppose Satan is called the great dragon? His appearance or characteristics, Nachash, maybe reptilian. Yeah, it could be. Also, some animals all animals have specific habits, and each animal is thought of in a certain way. So, like domesticated animals are animals, and then in a lot of the manuscripts, if it's a wild animal, it's called a beast, because you got to be careful. It'll attack you and tear you up. A tame animal will not. A cat is not going to bother you. Mountain lion will kill you. So things like that. So I don't know that much about that, but you have dinosaurs. And actually, when you look at even just regular English books, when you go back to I want to say 15th or 16th century, somewhere around in there, when it talked about large reptilian type creatures, they were always called dragons. Whether they had wings and flew or whatever. There's ground dragons, flying dragons. They're just reptiles, large reptiles. And then somewhere along the line, the word changed and it became dinosaur. So there's flying dinosaurs. There's other, I would imagine meeting a T-Rex in the middle of a forest. He would just try to eat you. He's a wild animal, especially a reptile. And so Satan always is trying to destroy us. So any kind of wild beast, it would be a good indicator, especially if it's a word meaning wild beast as opposed to a tame or domesticated animal. I think that's probably why that is. And there might be more to it. I just don't know much about dragons. I mean, actual dinosaurs. It would be interesting from a biblical standpoint to look at all the reptiles and the dinosaurs, if we really could figure out certain ones did breathe fire or they didn't breathe fire or they did whatever, to kind of figure out how that would go together. So really interesting if you think about it. Do we know the exact date of creation? If one day is 1,000 years, would that be close to 6,000 years, continuous years, or with pauses? What date is exactly 6,000 years from creation? Yeah, that's why we have our Dead Sea Scroll calendar. Now, that's the thing. And as mentioned in this, So like this year, this 2025 is the year 5950. It's a Jubilee year. And it started March 19th, 2025 is that Wednesday, New Year's. But basically, yeah, we can calculate it. And if you go back to our Dead Sea Scroll calendar website, it comes up. So like right now, as I'm speaking, it's Tuesday Israeli time. It's actually, I do broadcasts on Monday, so it's Monday at 7 to 8. But it's already Tuesday at 2:59 in the morning, Israeli Standard Time. Or actually, okay, it's 3 o'clock. So 3 o'clock Israeli Standard Time. So the Pharisee date, which is the lunar calendar, it's the 29th of Tishrei, 5786. The Dead Sea Scroll date is Heshvan 5, 5950. Gregorian date is October 21st, if it's Tuesday, October 21st, 2025. So these are the dates that we would want to look at, try to figure things out. But we have our own studies over here. This is where you can just click on one of these or add a four-digit year from 1900 to 2100 and figure out stuff. So like, for instance, I was born in 1965. 1965 was 5890 a.m., and that's from creation. So yeah, we can actually calculate this. There are Dead Sea Scrolls that talk about, for instance, the Messiah coming one Shemitah after the end of the 9th Jubilee of the 8th Ona of the Second Age, So it's very specific, and that comes out to be 32 AD. Give or take a year. I'm not trying to pinpoint anything, but give or take a year, then yeah, creation would have been 3925, and the year 6000 is 2076 would be the new year in the millennial reign, basically, if it follows that pattern. So we are at that particular point. So yeah, we can actually calculate this stuff. What I meant to show you was in here we have our UNA studies, and we have then there's an intro, which is all this stuff, how the age works and the different things like that. But then you go through each one of these and we will have everything mapped out. So we're in the 12th Ona now, which is the 500-year period, the last 500-year period before the millennial reign. And then the Jubilees. We have it all broken down, but here's each Jubilee, 7 Shemitahs in a Jubilee year. And if there's anything we can put in there, we've done this starting with creation and going forward. Anything that had a date from either Genesis or the Bible, or Jasher, Seder Olam, Jubilees, anything like that we can actually date. And so here's some ideas here about the Balfour Declaration, World War II, Israel's second return. So the dates are given. Taking the Temple Mount, annexation of the Golan, Sanhedrin was established in 2004. So you can figure out it was in the 5th Shemitah of the 9th Jubilee. Gaza War in 21 started there. And then we go on from there. So the end of grace, and they name each one of the ages. So the first one is the age of creation. Second was age of Torah. Third is the age of grace. And the fourth and final one, which is only 1,000 years instead of 2,000 years, is called the kingdom age. And it's referenced in several manuscripts. So that's just basically how their calendar works. And we did this specifically because a lot of things have patterns, and you don't see the patterns in the Gregorian year, like in 1997 or 2004, but you do see patterns when you're looking at Jubilees and Shemitahs. So very, very interesting. One of the things I mentioned before is that only on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, the 3rd or 4th, I forget, day of Hanukkah. Is it Hanukkah? Tabernacles. 3rd or 4th day of Tabernacles, that Friday, the Sabbath starting, is when the Yom Kippur War began. And it's also on that calendar when the Hamas attacked and started the war. And it's not the same on any other calendar, Gregorian, modern Jewish, Muslim, anything like that. And very few people know the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. So it's interesting to see patterns like that. So anyway, so yeah, we know that. So creation would have been 3925 according to this calendar. The year 6000 is 2076. and we should be able to use it to calculate dates and things like that. Is there a parallel between the spirit of Messiah moving on the waters and the ark moving over the waters in the pattern of a cross? This is recorded by Clement and Hippolytus and Ephraim. I don't know. There very well could be. You asked some interesting questions. Hi, by the way, I haven't seen you for forever. But yeah, it's interesting to look at patterns like that, because a lot of that stuff is like in Peter, when it talks about, he's talking about only 7 souls were saved by Noah on the boat going through the flood. And that is a pattern or a type or a picture of our baptism. So he's connecting a lot of those things. So those are ancient memories and probably how things got started that everybody's forgotten about, even in his day. So it's really interesting to look at that. So I don't know for sure about as far as forming a cross. Some of the things I have heard is when you look at the formation of the 12 tribes, and as they traveled, some of them always staying on the right of the temple or on the left, north, south, east, and west, forming a cross. So some very interesting things like that. The Hebrew version of Revelation, when it talks about the people taking a mark on the mark of the beast, it's called an omen. And when you talk about the 144,000 being sealed with God's mark, it's called a tav. Now, it looks kind of like a box with a little curly Q on it in modern English, but in Paleo Hebrew, it was actually a cross. So to me, it's interesting. It's like those that believe in Messiah, God marks them with a cross on their forehead. Don't know if I would actually see it or not, but the information is there's marked with a tav or a cross. And then there's this omen, this other anti-mark that the mark of the beast does. So there's a lot of things like that. Question, what are your thoughts on people putting these 12-foot skeletons in their yard? They remind me of the Nephilim. Yeah, me too. I don't know if they're doing that on purpose or not, but and we've mentioned this before, and I probably ought to mention it now. According to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, the actual date for the flood is the 17th of the 2nd month. That's mentioned in Scripture. In the year 1656. So you know the exact day and month and year, how long ago it's been since the flood occurred. So that's a cool thing in itself. But it actually was on the mid-spring date, the 17th of Iyar. And so what happens is, again, we were talking about the start of the year is in Nisan, in the spring equinox, and modern Jewish calendar has their start. Again, it's the new moon closest to, but it's based on the fall equinox. So everything got shifted 6 months. So the flood date is actually mid-spring. But when you flip the calendar 6 months, it becomes mid-fall. Well, mid-fall is where we celebrate Halloween. And most people don't remember the fact that Halloween is the Day of the Dead. It's an ancient memory for the flood. The ghouls and the evil ones that were destroyed that might come back, and the spirits and the demons and that kind of stuff. It's an ancient memory. It's supposed to remind you that God is not always going to turn the other way. At a certain point, he's had enough and destruction comes. So you need to repent. It's just a basis for that. I think it's funny how people will go out and celebrate Halloween, but they don't believe that there was a real flood. It's like, where do you think Halloween came from? All of these things, whether they're pagan or not, they've been paganized, but they all go back to some historical thing. So I often think the same thing when I say a 12-foot skeleton. It's like, there's another dead Nephilim. Again, it's just one of those things that remind you. When you're a Christian and you know the scriptures and you know the old scrolls, it seems like everything reminds you of God. Everything points back to repentance, to salvation, to prophecy, calendar stuff. It's really amazing. So yeah, that's my kids keep telling me we need to decorate for Halloween. And instead of being creepy, weird, pagan type stuff, what we need to do is put a big blow up Noah's Ark in the front yard. So people will say, Why Noah's Ark? I mean, it'll be obvious, little animals on top of a boat. Like, because that's the day, you know. Well, flipped around, but memory of the day. I'm not going to do that, but it's just interesting. Everybody's like, you should put up a Noah's Ark. Do you think John used the same language in John 1:1 as it is written in Genesis 1:1? It definitely is similar. I mean, the same basic idea. In John 1:1, especially in the Hebrew version, it's really interesting the way he talks about in the beginning was the Son of God. The Son of God was with El, and the Son of God was Eloah, which is one of the Elohim. And it makes it very, very clear in the Hebrew version that we're talking about a trinity, not angels, but a trinity of God. There's a Father, Son, and a Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. And the three are three Eloah, or the Elohim, which is anciently worshipped. And Messiah is one of those. And he is the son of El. And so it's really interesting to look at that kind of stuff. Whereas in the Greek, it says in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and Logos was God. That's probably the best way to say it to a Greek-speaking audience, which is 90% of all the Gentiles, you know. But it is really interesting. I don't know if it's exactly the same. I don't think it is, but the meanings would be the same if you're using the Targum, that is. Couldn't the dividing of the waters between and above the firmament, or being divided above the firmament, stars, be the spirit realms of the second heaven, fallen above the heaven? What are your thoughts on evil versus heavenly effect of man's mind? It could be symbolized that way. I take it as literal, though, that God created the atmosphere of the earth, the first heaven, and above and below it were water. All the waters, most of the waters underneath it, and then a water canopy above it, because it fits all the other information that we have. So, and that would be all in the first heaven. So it's the atmosphere of the planet. How can 2 Peter 3:12, looking for the hastening and the coming of the day of God, be reconciled with the Ezra Apocalypse, which talks about the day of the Lord being fixed, and you can't speed it up? Thanks. Good question. I would love to look at, and we will eventually look at 2 Peter chapter 3 and see exactly what it says in the Hebrew. Assuming it says the same thing, which it very well could be. The hastening, I'm not sure. We'd have to look at the word for hastening in Greek and see what meanings it can have. When you just look at this directly, it means we're looking for and trying to hasten the coming of the Lord. It might be saying that. Or we're looking forward and hoping for it to come. If we don't know the day or the hour of its coming, then we would hope that it comes in our lifetime, which we all do. And it could be saying something like that. See, the word hastening is in Old English, and I'd have to look it up and see. But that's a really good point. We'll see what happens or what it actually says in the Hebrew. We're finding all sorts of little things like that. They're almost identical, slightly different nuance, which actually fits together. Why do some people say Lilith was Adam's first wife? It's a legend created by Kabbalists. I think it was Kabbalists way back in the day, or well, medieval legends. And so Lilith is actually a demon, and I don't know much about her. She's recorded as a being in, I forget which chapter. So I think it's 31 or 13. I forget. And anyway, she's recorded in Isaiah as being, a lot of Isaiah uses a lot of things like out in the wilderness where people aren't, there's jackals and satyrs and wild animals and dragons and stuff like that. And that's how we translate them, because a lot of the people didn't know if we're talking about weird wild animals, and we don't know which animal we're talking about, or if it's demonic, or both, or demonically possessed animals or whatever. But in the place in Isaiah, in King James, it talks about a screech owl. And the word Lilith has nothing to do with a screech owl, other than the fact that the demon Lilith, a lot of demons and saints and gods and goddesses and stuff had patron animals. And so the Lilith, when you find how she's worshipped by the Phoenicians and the Canaanites and stuff like that, she would have lions and owls. Those were her two patron things. So I don't know if Lilith became in some language another word for owl because of that, paganistic type stuff. But anyway, in the Middle Ages, it was developed a theory that Lilith was Adam's first wife. God created Adam and Lilith, and Lilith would not submit. There's a whole story on specifically what was going on, but she would not submit to a man. So she was banished, became a demon, that kind of thing. And God created Eve, who was a good girl, submitted to her husband. And that's not true. None of that's true. But it's interesting to wonder, like, what was going on back in the day that they had to make up a legend like that. But they connected it to the Lilith, the demonic Lilith. So we probably, with the text that we have now, we probably can find more about the history of Lilith eventually. But anyway, that's what happened. So in the Middle Ages, they took the name of a demon and just made up the story about Adam's first wife. And it's all basically, I'm pretty sure it's Kabbalistic, but it's Middle Ages. So none of it's true. Well, there is a demon named Lilith, but that's got nothing to do with Adam's wife. Adam only had one wife, it was Eve. Were God's appointed feasts for the Jews and not for the Gentile? They're for specifically for the Jews. Gentiles that wanted to could observe, for the most part. Gentiles are forbidden in Exodus chapter 12 to observe the Passover, specifically to eat the meat, the lamb meat from the Passover. They would have to convert to Judaism completely and be circumcised. So there's no exceptions to that. It says very clearly in the text, no exceptions. If you're not a converted Jew, you cannot observe the Passover ritual. Now, that's the law of Moses. That was back then. That's not now. We have a different form of that when we do communion. Our wine and our most churches, it's grape juice and crackers, which are symbolic of the wine and the bread, which are symbolic of the blood of the lamb and the lamb's meat, or the wine and the lamb meat, actually, I should say, which are symbolic of the death, the blood, the salvation, and the living life given by the Messiah. So that's why it's crazy for everybody to think that the wafer, that they do is actually God, flesh and blood disguised as a wafer. It's like, no, it's a symbol of a symbol of a symbol of a symbol of the Messiah. But it all goes back to that. So anyway, so are they fulfilled like Jesus' prophecies and laws? Will God give new feasts in the millennium? Yes, actually, that's true. Could a new feast begin with the rapture or something else? Okay, so yeah, according to the text, the Damascus Covenant and the Dead Sea Scroll actually tells us that originally there was a ritual involving wine and bread, and we don't know anything else about it. It was a Melchizedekian Passover ritual, would be at that time period. When Moses came, the Seder was created. So the whole Passover ritual that we know about today. When the new covenant came, or the age of grace, it was converted into Christian, what we would call Christian communion. So it's just the communion thing that we're doing. According to them, they were looking forward to the ritual changing when they could enter the age of grace. Everybody was looking forward to the first Pentecost after the death of Messiah, because that's when the new age would begin and things would be vastly different. Most of the Essenes at that point quit the priesthood as prophesied, as they were supposed to, and became missionaries, became Christians, and started pastoring churches. But they also taught, though, that when Messiah comes at his second time, the ritual will change again, because we will all be taking it together. Jews, Gentiles that are Jewish and Gentile human beings, the immortals, the angels, and the Messiah. It makes very clear demarcation of this. So it's a really interesting time. So yeah, they change from dispensation to dispensation. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are very dispensational. So could a new feast begin with the rapture? The rapture probably is recorded in the Feast of Trumpets. I can't say that definitively because I don't have a ritual for the fall festivals. I have the ritual, we all have the really big ritual for Passover. And because of the Dead Sea Scrolls, I have part of the ritual for Pentecost. So I understand that a lot better now. I have no rituals for new wine, new oil, for tabernacles, for trumpets, or the Yamin Noraim, or Hanukkah, or anything like that, if there was one. There was for these others for sure because they teach prophecy. So we just need to find those. And if you could just pick the ritual up and read it, just like you look at a Seder, Passover Seder, it's really obvious what it means. So it'll be interesting to see. So yeah, I think it'll be connected with that. It seems to me that we should still honor the Sabbath, the day of rest, for both from Genesis and the Ten Commandments. However, most Christians today do not do so. Where did that change? It didn't change. We always observed as Josephus said, we've always observed a 7-day cycle. Observing the Sabbath day is observing a 7-day cycle. We always have that in our calendar. Everybody on the planet, according to Josephus, has always observed the Sabbath. Only the Jews do the rituals of the lighting the Shabbat candles and saying the prayers in Hebrew and that kind of stuff. So like the Seventh-day Adventist always had a big deal about you have to observe the Sabbath or that's the mark of the beast and you're going to die and go to hell, Ellen G. White stuff. But what's funny about that is they don't observe a Sabbath the way the Jews do. They do it the way all Gentiles do because we use the same calendar. Even the Gregorian calendar has a 7-day cycle. So you should be taking your days off, your weekends. 2 days of rest is better than one, in my opinion, but whatever. There actually are some Christian denominations that observe the Sabbath and observe the first day of the week also. Anciently, the Sabbath is where you go to the temple or go to the synagogue and you do rituals. The first day of the week is if you have a rabbi and you're religious, the first day of the week, which is Sunday morning, is when you go study under your rabbi. That's the way it's always been. And you see that in the Dead Sea Scroll calendar and you see it in Matthew and many other places. So it's a trick of Satan to say, when did this change? Nothing changed. Other than the fact that we don't go to a temple today because there's no temple. And I would be forbidden to do that anyway because I'm Gentile. And Paul tells me if I'm born Gentile, do not get circumcised under any circumstances, because then I would have to observe the Jewish law, which is God didn't create me to do. So very, very clear in the New Testament. So most Christians don't observe the Sabbath. Well, they do in as far as a 7-day cycle. And as far as worshiping the Lord or studying, a lot of them will go to church on Sundays. And if you're like a lot of us, you'll go to church on other days too. It used to be a thing Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. And like my church doesn't have a Wednesday night service, we have a Thursday night service. I teach a home group on Tuesday nights, and I do this on Monday nights. And I go to church on Sunday morning. So I actually go to a lot of services. So anyway, that's the big deal. Everybody thinks that you're supposed to, even if you're a Gentile, you've got to learn Hebrew. You've got to say the prayers properly. You have to observe, light the Shabbat candles. And, according to tradition, a female has to light the Shabbat candles. So if I'm a single guy living in an apartment, I have to break the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath because I'm not supposed to light those candles. So there's a lot of things like that that people don't understand. And a lot of the Hebrew roots type people try to push it a little too far. Again, it's a great thing to learn because it teaches prophecy. It's not to be abandoned, but it's not to be legalized either. And if the law of Moses was still in effect, we would be forbidden to do that. We could go to a Jewish guy's house if they allow us to and observe the rituals, but we could not do it ourselves. It would be creating a new religion and therefore punishable by death, according to the old laws. So, but Jesus came, nullified all those old laws. So it's perfectly fine for us to study everything. So hopefully that helps. We do have a book in our, let me see one thing here real quick. Let me get, there we go. So this is our main website. And if you go to our bookstore, we have all of these books, some 30 some, but we have one called Ancient Origins of the Hebrew Roots Movement. So this one right here. And it will give you all the information on why we do or do not observe a Sabbath. It doesn't talk anything about the calendar, like what we're doing, but why things are forbidden or not forbidden, when they changed, if they changed, that kind of stuff. And we'll talk about how the Hebrew Roots movement actually goes way too far than it should. So anyway, along with that is Ancient Origins of Modern Holidays, which most of these guys say this is pure paganism, and it's usually not. So it's something that we would need to look at to see how you nullify paganism, which is what we're supposed to do. Was the prehistoric caveman related to us? And is it when Cain married another where there were cave people? Who are the others? Prehistoric man are just people, or cavemen, if you want to call it that way, are people that rejected society and went and lived in caves. This is recorded in a lot of the different Josephus and a lot of other places. Africa, the northern band of Africa, not Egypt, but the other places, people rejected government and wanted to live as nomads. They didn't want to be under the authority of a tyrannical government, which I applaud them. But the only problem is if you don't have an army to keep yourself free, or you don't carry weapons, if we all carried weapons equal to their weapons, we wouldn't have a problem. And I think it was Hercules that conquered that entire area, according to Josephus, and subdued. They were called troglodytes, something like that. Anyway, they were the cave dwellers. So anyway, and then pre-flood, you probably had the same kind of a thing. As far as Cain, it talks about Cain married his sister. Her name was Alwyn. And it was one of the major problems between him and Abel, because you're not supposed to marry. They were twins born at that point. Abel had a twin sister. Cain had a twin sister. And so they were supposed to marry the other sisters, not the ones that were born with. He wanted to marry his twin sister. Maybe she's more beautiful, I don't know, but for whatever reason, they wanted to do that. So when he was banished, he went to the land of Nod. That's not that Nod was, we're going to see this when we look at the Cain stuff, but it's not that the land of Nod was already there populated by people. It became known as the land of Nod. And we actually have maps to where his underground city was, the city of Enoch. So very fascinating stuff, but that's where the others came from. There were no other humans. There were no other half humans or anything like that at that point. This is the beginning of creation. So again, if there was a pre-Adamic creation, that would be a totally different subject. They were all destroyed, because if this is a recreation, everything would have been obliterated. Maybe possibly stone monuments or something surviving a flood, but the way that it sounds like everything would have been incinerated and then recreated. So anyway, that's basically, according to the text, where that happens. So if he married his sister, there are no other human beings. And then they have that historical story, that would be the case. And we'll get to that in a week or two. Great question, though, by the way. A lot of people ask about that. In the Hebrew copy of Revelation, are the 7 trumpets blown shofar, or I'd have to look it up and see. I want to say it's shofar. So yeah, I believe so. In Jubilees 6, the tekufas are translated new moon. Was that the original Hebrew word? It's probably Kodesh. We would have no way of knowing, because the original Hebrew is translated into Giez, and it was kept in the Ethiopian Coptic Church. So the oldest and basically the only copy of Jubilees that we have is from the Ethiopic. Now we do have a handful of chapters, and the chapters seem to be identical with the chapters in the Ethiopic. for the exceptions of the numbers. So, for instance, if you start looking at the Jubilees number system, they get up to 300 years off. And then all of a sudden, you see somebody trying to correct them and they start going back. So, between creation and the death of Jacob or Joseph or somebody like that, it's perfect. Okay. But in the middle, it's like off 300 years. So you can tell somebody's tried to edit it, change it, put it back, something. The Dead Sea Scrolls, we don't have enough of them to actually look at the whole timeline, but there's just like 2 or 3 mentions of a like Abraham being 75 when this happened or something like that. And they match Genesis, the Hebrew versions, perfectly. And actually, they match the Dead Sea Scroll version of Genesis perfectly. So there's something lost in the translation. But the stories look like they're fine. There's obviously some problems with something, the numbers anyway. And so whether it's a Tekufa, a Chodesh, a Tekufa, or actually a new moon, I doubt it would be new moon. Because of the text there actually says in Jubilees, they will err not following the sun pattern, but start following the moon pattern. So obviously it's teaching that a lunar calendar is not correct. So I would guess that it's going to say Chodesh, meaning new month. And I often wondered that too. I looked it up because that's all Hebrew. And I looked it up in the New Testament. Remember that place where Paul says, don't let anybody judge you to a Sabbath, a holy day, a new moon, food, festivals, because these are just a shadow of things to come, but the substances of Christ. I looked that up because Sabbath is Sabbath and all that stuff, but the new moon part. And I was kind of surprised because new means new. And what we have translated moon is the same kind of thing in Hebrew. It means month. So properly, it's the new month, just like it is in Hebrew. But if you are using a lunar calendar, the new month would be a new moon. So it becomes kind of synonymous. And at that time, that was the common idea. So I would imagine it does, but I have no way of checking it. Hopefully we'll get a whole Hebrew copy of that. That'd be fantastic. In Mark 10:21, Jesus counsels the young ruler to take up the cross and follow him. This was before Jesus' crucifixion. How could the young ruler interpret take up the cross? Thanks. People were being crucified way before Jesus by the Romans. I believe it was first invented by the Persians, but the Romans made great use of it. Because if you take a guy, whether it's a cross or a T or whatever, you just nail him up on a pole and let everybody see how long it takes for him to die. And then you leave the body up there to rot for a while. It definitely discourages disobedience. And the Romans did this to a lot of people way back before Jesus. So they knew a lot about crucifixion. And I don't know if it actually says in the original the cross or not, but that's what we would say in English for sure. So there's no problem about them not knowing what it would be. That's a great question, though. No one's ever asked that before. Okay, is it possible that the earth tilted on its axis during the flood? A lot of people think so. Well, what we're going to see, though, is according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, the calendar and the other things, Jasher and Jubilees, and then Enoch also, it seems to indicate they had summer, winter, fall, and spring before the flood. The only way that could happen is if the earth is tilted. Now, it may have tilted more so that it's more adaptive or whatever, but if it was perfectly straight and always revolving, we wouldn't have any seasons. So there wouldn't have been seasons pre-flood if that was the case. And it seems to indicate by the old documents we've always had seasons. I know a lot of people will talk about the place in Genesis where it says from this point, it seems like it's saying from this point on, there will always be hot and cold, wet and dry. And that is a reference to seasons starting right now. But it doesn't say necessarily that they started at this point. And it could be a reference to several things. So if you're going by the Dead Sea Scrolls, we've always had some sort of seasonal things. But there still could be a tilt in the axis. There's been slight changes in the axis throughout the centuries. Even just a real small, like a tenth of a change, can actually cause a lot of problems. Genesis 1:16, the sun and moon rule the day and the night. How else can the word for rule be translated? How do they rule the day and the night? Oh, just like they're the main things. Yeah, it doesn't mean that they're cognizant and they can actually go around and do things. It's talking about they are the main ones. So at nighttime, it would be pitch black until the moon, like at a new moon, where you don't see the moon at all. And then at a full moon, you could actually see a lot of things. So it's the biggest light, the ruling light, the main one. And then the sun doesn't change. Of course, if it's really cloudy, you don't see it, but still there's a lot of light outside. It's never pitch black when the sun is up. And then we use language like that too. When the sun is up, the sun doesn't come up and go down. The sun is always stationary and we're going around the sun. But that's just our language. It appears to rise in the east and set in the west, and the moon appears to rise. And the calendars talk about the gates where they come up and down in, that kind of a thing. So yeah, ruling just means the principal one. There's no light brighter than the moon at night, and there's no light brighter than the sun in the daytime. I think that's how it'd be best translated. But if you're going to say that without, see, we don't, like when you're translating scriptures, you don't want to, if unless it's at all necessary, to take one Hebrew word and make a sentence out of it. That would be best to do in commentary. This word has the connotation of whatever. So you're going to try to do one word for one word to try to be as close to the text as possible. So rule is probably the best word. I can't think of there might be a modern Hebrew word or a modern English word rather, that's better. Maybe I'd have to think about it on how I would translate it. Since the flood waters came from below and above, they would have been burning in superheated water as well as drowning. Prophecy of fire and water. Yeah, possibly. Yeah, it would, anything coming up from under the earth like that, because something caused the equivalent of an earthquake, and I'm sure there would be lava coming up with it. So that's a really good point. Super chat, $50. Thank you very much for the donation. All your donations really help us a lot. We are doing really well at putting the Hebrew New Testament together. If you're like me, it seems like it's taking forever, but we actually are making really good progress. We've got a really good, I don't want to say we're over half done, but at least half done with the general epistles, maybe even more, because certain things take a long time. And so this last couple of phases might go quick, might go really quick, actually. But we've got a good, steady version with lots of questions. Should this be translated this way or that way? In James, 1st, 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Jude. Actually, we need to do 2nd and 3rd John still, which those should go quick. They're just one chapter a piece, and they're small chapters. But we're really getting close to that, and there's some really interesting things that we're finding in there. Nothing that changes anything, just the things that you've always wondered about, like what is the sin unto death? Well, the Hebrew version makes it extremely clear. What is, I can't think of others, but other talk about Moedim connected with the second coming. So we have an idea of the calendar dates of when certain events would happen. Maybe not the years, but the festivals. And so there's just a lot of interesting talk, just a little extra change in the verb or one extra word or something really seems to explain a lot of things. There's a lot in there. Okay, Chris asks, have you ever studied or taught about the Symbion? Okay, not sure what that is. As an example of God creating something. In this case, an intermittent spring on a regular weekly, schedule in order to mark the Sabbath. Yeah, that's, yeah, I never have thought about that or anything. The only thing that this stuff talks about is it first wants you to make sure you understand evening and morning. So what a proper day is. So sunset to sunset is a day. And you mark 7 days. There's 1 through 6, and then there's a rest day or a Sabbath. And you have to keep that set going. But then even equally important is you count for them properly to make months and years, Shemitahs, Jubilees, Onas, and ages, so that you can calculate the prophecies and the thing, and just history in general that way. So yeah, no, I haven't really looked at anything like that. It'd be interesting. Could the Essenes be a transliteration? Yeah, actually it is. The word Essene means healer. It's actually a Greek word. And so these, in their text, they call themselves the Yahad, those that love God, or they are the one in the spirit, actually, is what that would mean. And they were led by the Zadok priests. So the sons of Zadok, the sons of light, and then they were also known for their herbal medicine and their faith healing and everything like that. They were definitely well known for it, because if everybody else was dying around 60, that was kind of common back then, and the Essenes would die around 120. They basically had double lifespans than average people. You know, some of the rabbis lived to be 70, maybe 80. So it's not the kosher food that was doing it, not the food in general. It had to be herbal medicine and other things. Josephus, he interviewed an Essene and asked him, what is your secret to long life type thing? And they responded by talking about strict adherence to scripture. And that just means following their idea of what the scripture meant. So it's like, you know, if I was to say I'm a Baptist, I'm a strict Baptist. Well, that may be identical in food or whatever we're talking about to a Nazarene or a Catholic, but there's probably some differences. So anyway, but their idea, their avoidance of extreme negative emotion, and it's translated anger, but I'm thinking just any extreme emotion. If you're always upset, if you're always angry or whatever, it really degrades your life. And then the other thing was not the food they ate so much, but their herbal medicine. So very, very interesting to that. But yes, so Essene means healer. And that's obvious. If all the doctors lived to be 120 and the people that didn't go to doctors all died at 60, you'd be thinking, I think I want to go talk to an Essene, especially when you have a pain. So that's how that got started. And actually, there's an interesting comment in one of the ancient texts. I'll have to find that. But they were talking about the original Christians were called Nazarenes because Jesus of Nazareth, from that. And then Nazar there's a whole interesting set of things connected with that. But another one is, and I forget the term, but it's based off of Essenes. So we were called something Essenes or something similar to that. So it's interesting to see the connection between the Nazarene, the prophecies about the Nazarene, and then the long-lived ones, or the ones that were looking for the Nazarene and believed in the prophecies, had the school of the prophets. So they are not mentioned in the Bible. And when I wrote it out in Hebrew, it said assassin. Yeah, I don't know how you would have got that. Also, remember some of like the AIs and just, well, not even AIs, but just the translation sites. Some of them are really good and some of them are not. I really get surprised sometimes when they come out and telling me this is that. And it's like, how did you get that? The AIs seem to be better, but I wouldn't necessarily trust them all. That's why on our text, what we're doing is looking at the root word, and in the back of the book, we're having an interlinear. So they in boxes, excuse me, like if it says Yeshua HaMashiach Adonai, Jesus, Messiah, our Lord, Jesus Christ, our Lord. So Jesus would be, Yeshua would be this word in Hebrew. So it'd be Strong's H whatever. I think Messiah's 4899. Been translating a lot. So, but just so you can look it up. And so maybe Yeshua means salvation, but maybe it also means something else, or could mean something else. So you'd be able to look all of these up. So we're trying to do that just to be thorough. So Yeah, but Essenes, actually, it's a Greek word meaning healer. What year was Jesus born? So, born should have been 2 BC. Oh, let's look it up. If we go to the DSS calendar back here, because there's I think it had been the fourth Ona, if I remember correctly. Oh, no, I'm way off of that. Wait, hold on. Not fourth, it'd be eighth. 2,000 years each. Eighth Ona. So let's see. So it would have been Jesus Christ born 2 BC. So that would have been 3924 AM. And the word AM just means from creation. So 3924. And so, which would be 2 BC. Plus the 34 years, because he was 33 and a half. He was in his 34th year when he died. So you can calculate it that way. So this is what I envision for the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, for us to be able to look stuff up, add things, see if there's any patterns in Shemitahs, Jubilees, and you can do it easy with a calculator, just numbers, but I don't see many patterns that way. So good question. I noticed the heavenly Jerusalem is referred to in Hebrews and in addition to Revelation. So is it a real place or just a metaphor for some level or state of holiness or being? I would think it's a real place. I'd have to look at the different places to see, but I would take even Revelation to be literally, with the exception that the book of Revelation is a vision that John saw. So there is no real seven-headed red dragon, but John in the vision actually saw a seven-headed red dragon. So it's like you having a dream of that. It's actually what you saw in the dream. So it's literal in that sense. So the dream or the vision meaning something. But I would think it's actual place. Super chat, $20. Thank you very much. Again, that really helps us in a lot of things. Super chat, $5. Thank you very, very much. Super chat, $5. Ken, when does the word prototon mean monster, or does the word prototon mean monster in Luke 21:11? Yes, actually, it's used in Greek a lot of ways like that. The general idea is, if a bear could be, if you leave it alone, it'll probably leave you alone. It's a wild animal, but it's a normal bear. If for some reason, somehow genetically or whatever, the bear was messed up and maybe it's twice as big as normal and it just likes eating humans, and maybe it's disfigured or whatever, and its claws are bigger or whatever. So we call that a monster, or anciently, that's what a monster would be, something that's abnormally dangerous, even though it's a wild animal, tame animal, whatever. And a monster, if you call a human being a monster, usually they look normal, but they're almost demonic. They want to kill everybody. They're mass murderers and stuff. So it means multiple things like that. But the main idea in Greek is this idea of somehow it's genetically different or whatever. So that would be Nephilim. If I mean, most of the time when something is changed genetically, it dies fairly quick. If it's an accident, it doesn't live very long most of the time. But if it's a remnant of a genetic experiment done by Nephilim type medicine, then yeah, those did exist and probably still do, some of the animals and stuff. Genesis 36 and Jasher 36 and other things like that. So yeah, that's one way of talking about it. So in Luke 21:11, it's meaning that one of the things that men's heart fail for fear on are these monsters on the earth. So again, you have to ask what monster. It could be Nephilim, weird creatures, like the creatures out of the pit, the demonic locusts, or it could just be demon-possessed people that are monsters in spirit. They just like slaughtering people. I don't want to get in trouble with YouTube, but like a certain war that's going on over around Israel, where people go in and murder and rape and all this other stuff, throw babies in ovens and stuff like that the Nazis did in World War II. And we have a hard time believing that any human being could actually do something like that to anybody. If it's an enemy, it's going to kill you, just kill it. But torture and weird things like that, that's definitely monster-ish. So it can be used multiple ways. So I know a lot of people are thinking that's probably a revival of Nephilim technology, which the scrolls talk about also, the whole idea of in the end times, right before the rapture or in that area, they start experimenting with Nephilim stuff and they start doing genetic tampering. The basic idea is to create a super soldier, somebody that, probably won't die until they've killed off most of the enemy. You know, being amoral, not knowing scripture, that sounds like a great idea for a military to do, special forces that are superhuman, but it's going to backfire. It always backfires, especially when humans do it, according to the pre-flood histories about what happened the last time that happened. So yeah, they go insane and become butcherers, or they're actually monsters in that sense. Good question. Okay, our last question. Oh, okay. Michelle became a member level angel. Welcome aboard. Thank you for helping support the ministry. And now you'll be able to get in the chat room and do different things. So, okay, we'll go ahead and stop there for tonight. And we'll pick up next week and we'll continue with day 5 and go through the Genesis accounts. And there'll be some really interesting stories we'll get out of Jasher, the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's some interesting things in the Seder's, other Jewish history books that we'll kind of plug together. We'll actually end up covering some of that Nephilim stuff too, I believe. So we'll go ahead and stop for tonight, and I'll see you guys next week. God bless.